Hi, this is Corey McCrae, the Senator for the 45th Legislative District, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, my go-to source for the latest news and insight on state and local government in Maryland.
Welcome to the briefing room here on the Conduit Street Podcast. I'm Dom Butchko. This is the final episode of our 5-part conversation on energy. In this grand finale, we're going to be turning our eye towards Annapolis. For 3 sessions, the General Assembly has made rising energy costs a central issue. In 2024, they passed the Brighter Tomorrow Act, and in 2025, they passed both the Next Generation Energy Act and the Renewable Energy Certainty Act. All 3 were squarely aimed at increasing both generation and storage. This year, the Utility Relief, or Reducing Energy Load Inflation for Everyday Families Act, was the legislature's massive omnibus bill, making significant shifts in state energy policy. In this episode, we are joined by Delegate David Fraser-Hidalgo, who chairs the House's Subcommittee on Energy. He was one of the primary architects of the Utility Relief Act, and he has had significant influence over state energy policy for several years. Delegate, welcome to the briefing room.
Thanks, Dom. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we dive into the policy conversation, when I have folks like you on, I love to start with just a little bit about you and a little bit about your journey. I started in politics. I was a local elected official. I know what it takes. And so I always find this background really fascinating on why someone ran for an office, what motivates them. So talk about how you found yourself in the House and how you found yourself in energy policy.
Oh, yeah. So it's not the traditional kind of route, which I'm guessing there's probably a lot of folks that don't have the traditional route. So I got a degree in history from St. Mary's College, but I didn't feel like I was ready to really teach history. I wasn't sure that was really what I wanted to do. So I bounced around doing a few things. I went into law enforcement. So I was in law enforcement for a few years. Very quickly backpacked through Southeast Asia to kind of regain some kind of semblance of mental health after that stint. And long story short, ended up running my own website development business for a while, myself and a few partners. And in 2007 and 2008, there was a technology tax that was passed during a special session. So mind you, I've gone from being a history major to, going into law enforcement and now running my own small web firm with some partners. And I found that I didn't think that was very good policy because it was passed during a special session. There was not really a good hearing structure. And it took the industry that's most able to just move and attack it, right? I went down to Annapolis many, many times with a bunch of the chambers, and then eventually kind of helped to pressure through a lot of folks the repeal of that, which happened in, I think, like 2008 after that special session. And then in 2011, there was an opening in my district. I'm in District 15 in Montgomery County. And then 3 delegates, one of the delegates decided that he was going to run for county council. And then a very good friend of mine at the time, Delegate Ben Kramer, called me on the phone and he's like, Dave, you need to run. He had known me from my law enforcement days. He goes, you need to run for this delegate seat. And I was like, Ben, I'm not into that. I'm running my business. I'm good. And he goes, no, you need to do this. This is like, I've seen you throughout the years from when you were in law enforcement to now. Like, this is who you are. You need to do this. He knew better than I did, Dom, because I didn't know. So I ran. And I lost at the time. There was the team picked up somebody else that they wanted to be on the team. So I kind of ran against an entire team, but I did well. I mean, I did okay. And I didn't ruffle any feathers. I wasn't mean or rude or nasty to anybody. And then 3 years later, that senator that was in my district now, Rob Gargiola, but Senator Rob Gargiola decided he didn't want to be the Senate anymore. So he resigned in the 4th year of a 4-year term, and then the kind of domino effect happened. And then Delegate Brian Feldman moved over to the Senate. He got appointed for the Montgomery County Central Committee, went into the Senate, and then I ran against 9 other people or 8 other people total, and I got appointed for the last year, and then kind of got through that, and then ran officially, and then got elected, and I've been doing it ever since.
Is that about 2016 then, is when you first were in?
2013 is when
2013
all the stuff happened. So 2014 was my first session, and then right into an election right after the session.
Right. Sorry. We're in the midterm cycle. For some reason, I was thinking presidential cycle.
Yeah.
I love history. I'm a total history nerd. My background right now is plants, but in the other room, it's all maps. I should have recorded in there. But my favorite question for history folks is what's your favorite period? Like, what's your favorite era?
This is probably the influence of my uncle, who was a World War II vet, and he fought in North Africa and Italy. He was in the army and he was a radio man. And so when I was a kid, he used to tell me me and my little brother, all kinds of stories. And that kind of got my interest. So I would say pretty much, the last century, a lot of, World War One, the Depression, the rise of, Nazism, Stalinism through the Cold War, all of that I find fascinating, which is really good to know some of that stuff because you can kind of see some of the markers today and you're like, oh,
Oh, 100%.
scary. That's exactly what happened in 1932. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of similar challenges too, like with the rise of AI and the rise of automation and the Industrial Revolution. And, it's
right.
it's different. Like so many people lost their jobs, but new jobs were created. Well, if there's just robots. But anyway, that's a different podcast. We don't need to get into
It
that.
is, but it is all fascinating because it's all connected to what we're eventually going to get to, which is data centers. So
Yes. Yes. And I will say, I will put a flag here. Data centers, episode 4. So if you haven't listened to that, definitely check that one out.
okay. Who did you have on for that?
The Virginia Association of Counties, because, like Virginia, everything's their fault anyway with this energy stuff. So we might as
They're ahead of
well,
us. Right.
yeah, might as well have them on. But anyway, let's turn to the legislation. We'll use that as a segue. So from a high level, first off, can you chart the course of the past several sessions and really from your perspective, what the broader plan in terms of energy is? So 2024, we had the Brighter Tomorrow Act that focused a lot on solar energy. Last year, 2025, we had two major bills, the Next Generation Energy Act, which was mostly natural gas and nukes, as well as some other process changes. Right. Renewable Energy Certainty Act, that was building on the solar stuff. We had a lot more predictability. This year, we have the Utility Relief Act, 3 years, 4 really consequential bills. How does all of that fit together?
Yeah, so I think what you're seeing, and I'm gonna then loop it back to your previous podcast. But look, and again from a historical perspective, all of this is happening at the same time, right, Dom? So, and this, like you have all this AI coming on, you have all these data centers that are being built, and data centers are nothing new, right? We've got I think 43 or 44 data centers in Maryland already. Data centers are nothing new, but these hyperscale, these really big data centers are, and the processing that's needed for AI is new. It's coming fast. And so you have this kind of combination of, the pandemic and worldwide trade and things going down and things going up. And all this is happening at the same time. And as AI starts to pop up, being that's kind of been like about a 20-year kind of leveled energy pattern, right? It's kind of like a little bit like this, a little bit like this, but, it goes up overall, but nothing dramatic. And then we start getting into 2024 and 2025, and things start getting really complicated with the PJM. They start getting really complicated politically. Then you have, the war in Ukraine and Russia, and then you have, this big pull, I think, from Europe trying to figure out how to get energy since they're not getting oil or gas. You have this kind of perfect storm happening, and then so prices aren't going like this anymore. Now they're starting to go like this.
Now, I will say, because this is a podcast, we're not doing the video. So for those who cannot see David's hand, first it was flat, and now we're going in an incline, right. A sharp incline.
It was a very slight incline, and then it just did the hockey stick, right? It just kind of
up and to the right.
And it's been really, really tough. So in some cases, and it's not, you just talked about in Virginia, this is not just a Maryland issue, right? This is going all over the country. I mean, it's probably all over the world. I'm kind of concentrating on Maryland. All this deployment, all this money like pouring in for data center development, for AI. So all that happening, perfect storm happening at the same time. It's just kind of the costs are just kind of going through the roof. And it's gone, in some cases, it's double and triple just in the last 3 or 4 years in some places. So what we have done over the last 3 years is trying to kind of open up some relief valves. In other words, the idea, okay, we've been pushing pretty hard on wind and solar, but now we're to the point where we need some more generation in the PJM in Maryland. So let's make sure we're not, discounting natural gas or nuclear, although there are concerns with coal and natural gas and nuclear. But let's just make sure that we have all the energy generation on the table, and then let's let them fall where they may, right? So we had a lot of debate over coal, and most of the coal plants are gone in Maryland, and that's generally because coal is a lot more expensive than natural gas. So there's been a big transition to natural gas because natural gas is cheaper and it's cleaner. And for coal, you need 5 or 6 times the amount of employees just to keep the same coal power plant running. So that's just supply and demand, and it's basic economics. Coal goes away. There are those folks that don't understand that, or they think that a lot of the policies that were put in place were designed particularly to kill coal. And I'm not going to lie, I'm very happy that coal is mostly gone because coal is really dirty. It's not good for the planet. It's not good for people. Black lung, the list goes on and on and on about coal. So in 2024, 2025, going into 2026, we wanted to make sure we also created ZECs or renewable credits for nuclear. We tried to make it clear that natural gas was open. We cleaned up the CPCN process to try to streamline it, to make it a little faster so different industries can get up online more quickly. And then we ran into the last year, at the end of the last year, when the new administration came in and just basically declared war on all renewables. Well, so there's always been incentives for fossil fuels, right? There's always been incentives for fossil fuels, but there hasn't really been nearly as much incentives for over 100 years, been incentives for fossil fuels, but not as much for solar and wind. But in the last 10, 15 years, we started putting in some money, specifically the feds. Well, if the current administration made all those incentives go away, and then did everything he could to kill offshore wind, which when you're talking about market flags, these are really bad market signals to send. So that's kind of put us in a bind now where we're trying to deploy solar because solar is immediately deployable, and battery storage because that's immediately deployable on the smaller scale. We're also trying to encourage it to be done on a medium or large scale, like a utility or community solar, but at the same time trying to balance all the other issues. And some of the other issues, of course, is that if you're into natural gas, well, a natural gas turbine from General Electric or whomever is like a 5 or 6 year wait. So that is a problem. If we want to get generation on as quickly as possible, that's a problem. So we try to deal with that. And then also for nuclear or SMR, small modular reactors, those could be great for us. But they are probably 9 to 12 years away. In a perfect world with all of your permitting and everything running side by side the whole time, fast tracking everything you can, is probably 9 years away. And of course, there was a big project in Georgia that was supposed to be about $15 billion. And it went to, I think, $32 or $33 billion. So it went way, 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 way over budget. And so there are those concerns, and they take a long time. They cost a lot of money, but they're good for 30 or 40 years, right? So, or longer. So you have all of those kind of things mixing together, and it gets very, very challenging when you get so many different pieces kind of mixed together, incentives, detractions, incentives, and it gets even more complicated. So trying to figure out all of those pieces is what the last few years have been, figuring out how to get that generation and that storage online as quickly as possible. And then there's a fight with transmission, right? So if you can't get them on, then there's a big fight with, okay, well, then we have to build transmission lines mostly to Pennsylvania to pull electricity from Pennsylvania down to supplement Maryland generation, which also then gets confusing because then there's a big concern that if data centers want to go up to Pennsylvania where they net out more energy than they use, and they want to buy electricity in Pennsylvania, then what does that mean for Maryland if we're dependent on Pennsylvania for some of this electricity, for this electrical generation? And then the whole PJM, it's Ohio, and so I'll stop there and let you dig in more on questions because it's very, very complicated. And through the last 2 years, that's kind of set the scene for this year.
No, it's been absolutely huge, especially the complexity. One point that you brought up that I really want to kind of dig in on for a second is market signals. I think everyone remembers in 2025 for renewable energy certainty, one of the biggest stakeholders was MACO, and the leading effort into 2025, the entire interim of 2024, that summer, that fall, MACO, as well as representatives from the environmental community, the industry, and when I say industry, I mean the solar industry, the regulatory community, we were negotiating what a solar package could look like in hopes of having something done for the General Assembly January 1st or whenever the opening day was of that next session. And I'll never forget 2024. We were feeling optimistic, things were moving ahead, and then Trump won in November 2024, and the solar industry saw that those incentives that you're talking about were about to be lost. And that totally upended a lot of our negotiations. And so those market signals are really, really important. Same thing for the Eastern Shore and the windmills. That is very controversial, but even just listening, regardless of kind of where you sit, whether you're for it or against it, viewing the signals of, the community doesn't want it, the government's for it. Now, the state's government's for it, but the federal government's against it. Those market signals are really important in driving progress one way or another. Transitioning for a second, because I want to zoom in. We've had several sessions, a lot of big energy policies, a lot of big bills, but this most recent session, the Utility Relief Act, that was the big omnibus bill. And it was sort of unprecedented, and I was in the room. I'll never forget this. The speaker herself went to the Senate and testified in Triple E on this bill. That's how important it was. And this was my fifth session. I've never seen that. I've talked to some old pros who've been doing this for much longer. They've never seen that. And that just kind of underlines the importance of the Utility Relief Act. Talk a little bit about that bill, why it's so important, what it does.
I've been in the General Assembly 13 years, and I've never been directly involved in a bill of this size, let alone an energy bill. I don't think we've had an energy bill of this size.
It was huge. It wasn't like 100+ pages and no pictures. What's with that? Very small font.
And not really any bullet points either. So
I had to look up a lot of words in that bill.
Oh my God. So I will give you the genesis, right? The genesis is what we talked about. Then you come in, and then we have a new speaker, Speaker Fannie Melnick, who is like a dynamo. That woman does not sleep. She works. And she always has been that way. I've known her since I came to the General Assembly, and that's who she is. She works harder than anybody that I know. And so she came in, and she's like, I remember over the holidays, she was calling me. She goes, David, this is our number one issue. I need you on this. We need to reduce the cost of the ratepayers. This is crazy. This is our issue. I need you. And, the new committee. So we also moved energy from what was economic matters for 20 years to environment and transportation. So that was a challenge in and of its own, trying to, kind of bridge that gap and energy being so big into a new committee. So,
and you returned to that. You start on environment and transportation, or what was a version of it, and now you're back?
Yeah, so here's the crazy thing, Dom. I was on environment and transportation for 9 years, and I loved being there. A lot of environmental issues, so I really, got my feet wet there, and I loved it. But I wanted to work on energy, and energy was in economic matters. So then I asked the speaker to move me to economic matters so that I could work on energy, and I was there for 3 years. And then Speaker Penny Melnick came in and said, energy and the environment should be together. And I was like, I absolutely 100% agree. And then I think in our conversation, I had said, yeah, that's what President Ferguson said. And he kind of moved all the stuff around. And then that's how we got Triple E. So she moved it over. And then this is when the conversations kind of started happening. And then we went into the session with that being the big priority. And then so we first started out with the idea of just a net metering kind of an M bill. And then that turned into, well, this is a good piece too, and this will reduce costs too. And then we had HB1 for the, kind of the supervisors and executives at the utilities, and like, well, what can we control and what can we not control? And so there's some things that we can control in Maryland to reduce those rates, and there's a lot of things that we can't control. So let's go after the things that we can control, which is basically our relationships with the utilities and our ability to kind of govern the utilities. But for the PJM, that one's really difficult, right? So we did a lot of things with the PJM, which I think are good, but we had limited leverage to press there to reduce ratepayer costs directly to the ratepayer. So we focused on what we could do in the state of Maryland. And so it was one piece, then another piece, then another piece, then another piece. And next thing you know, we were up to a 125-page bill, which I think was 3 or 4 days of debate off and on, holding, that kind of thing. Got it over to the Senate, then they took the bill and they did a lot of work to it. And they added a bunch of amendments onto the bill. Some of them good, some of them maybe not so good. And then the bill came back over, went to conference committee, and then we ended up kind of, putting some stuff in, stripping some stuff out. Ultimately, everybody agreed. But it was touch and go. It was touch and go to the point where, the few days right before the bill, before we got the conference committee and got it all squared away, I wasn't sure where where it was going to go. But it was a lot of work, and you are absolutely right. Like the speaker going over there and testifying on the bill directly and knowing so much about the bill.
Yes.
Not just being there and having somebody next to you like answer those questions, but she is an incredibly quick study. She learned so much so fast. And again, she's a force to be reckoned with. And so, she went over there and kind of like foisted herself on that body and just through her pure guts and will forced that bill out. I mean, there's a lot of people in the Senate that deserve a lot of accolades as well. They worked very hard, but I think that setting the tone going over there was a big piece.
Yeah, I think for a presiding officer, that was unprecedented. Your bias being a member of the House aside, that was definitely unprecedented for sure. From a high level perspective, what are the top few victories that you see in the Utility Relief Act? I know like rooftop solar, and we'll dig into that, so don't go too deep. But like I know the rooftop solar one's really big. I know there's some exploration of where we can have larger generation in the state of Maryland, having PPRP dig into that. What are the other kind of key victories that you see in the bill?
So I'll dig in and then feel free to jump in anytime because there's so much in the bill. As a matter of fact, I got a post-session wrap up and we were talking, it was me and Senator Feldman, who was, the Triple E senator that got it all out and worked on it. It was his cross file. And at the end of the post session, I just started reading through everything because we were missing so much. We were just like going through all the basic things. But first we started out with HB1, which is kind of capping what the ratepayer will pay for the big utilities. So whether it's BG&E or Pepco or whomever it is, the big utilities, it kind of caps their seniors to about
Their executive salary, right?
Yeah, their executive and or defined as supervisors to $250,000. They can make more than $250,000. When this is not we're not in a socialist society or communist society where we're stopping them. It's just if they're going to make more than that, then we basically said that should come out of their profit margins. Their current CEO was making somewhere around $6 million a year, given that people are having problems paying their bills. It was kind of an outrage that they were making $6 million from the BG&E side, and then from the Exelon side, I think it was 12 or 13 million. Their CEO. So
it's a good gig if you can get it.
Like Dom, like people's heads were kind of blowing up. So that was the first shot across the bow for the session. And surprisingly, that was a very challenging bill to get across the line. We kind of struggled with that, I think, as a new committee and me as the new subcommittee chair kind of struggled with the logic of the fight on that bill. I think we thought that bill would kind of go across more easily than it did. But there was a big fight I still struggle to figure out the reason why. But it eventually went through, and then it got absorbed into the Senate bill and the House bill later on. So I think that was our very first piece. I think providing some money to PPRP so that they can kind of figure out how to streamline some of these big projects and having them identify the most low-hanging fruit projects as quickly as possible. The auction, we did a reverse auction, $200 million, $100 million the first year, and then another $100 million. I think coming out of this SEIF, the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, I think that's another piece because that's showing that we're serious about getting some utility grade, solar up and running. Yeah, so I think those were some of the big pieces. I'm just kind of looking into the residential solar permitting, which we can talk about.
But it's really a Christmas tree. You guys had a lot of ideas and you're like, what can we do? We're going to throw the kitchen sink at this. And, we want to take what action we have. We're pulling the lever.
Right. I mean, I can just very quickly hit the title of the big pieces and then.
Yeah, by all means, do it.
Okay. The big pieces. We did an efficiency nonprofit loan program, electric vehicle emissions reporting, which we didn't have, universal program, a transfer program, the PSC, residential solar permitting, which we can talk about, environmental trust fund, Maryland Energy Clean Energy Center. We moved some stuff around, gave them some more money. Public Service Commission, transparency dashboards to make it a little easier for you to understand your bills, what's going on with energy, and required notice of distribution of costs to the ratepayers. Large load customer tariffs, that's the data center stuff. Regional Transmission Organization, RTO organization, that'll save a bunch of money. Transmission lines, property owner notification. That was really a big piece, especially for some of the rural counties And that got us some R votes. I know we're trying to be non-political, but transmission line upgrades, ATT and GETS, grid enhancing technologies, prevailing wage for solar energy generation stations larger than 2 megawatts, energy storage program capacity reporting, the Empower Maryland program, which is huge, data centers voluntary clean capacity rating program, data centers registration, portable solar generation systems, retail electricity supply, modification of the Drive Act, which I worked on for years, large capacity energy resources, nuclear energy procurement permitting, data center distribution, fast track procurement and technical fixes, renewable energy power purchase agreements, that has to do with retail, right? And a bunch of other things. Specific Energy Investment Fund. I'm sorry, the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. That's the SEEF. We did a lot in there. Alternative compliance payments and fees, SRENs. Well, not so much, but a little bit. Multi-year rate plans, investor-owned utility supervisor compensation, which we talked about, net energy metering. So the solar community, which was how the bill started out with just that piece, right, Dom? Forecast test years. Oh my God. Procurement of transmission energy storage devices, energy site zoning and permitting study.
I see why it was 125 pages.
And then when the Senate sent it back, it came back like 225 pages. It was crazy. Yeah.
But I will say a lot of those were crossouts though. So like the pages that they would strike counted as a whole page. Because I remember when I was going through, I saw that I'm like 200 pages, and I was like, oh, thank God, half of this I don't have to read.
I know, right? Yeah.
So I actually, you brought up something, and I want to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole if you don't mind. The portable solar generation. I think this is fascinating. A lot of people probably aren't thinking about this. Can you talk about that a little bit, like what the intent is and what it actually does? Because it's really interesting.
The balcony solar piece?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they call it balcony solar. It's otherwise known as balcony solar because the idea is like, let's say you're in an apartment building or a condo or something or house and you have a balcony. You could just put some solar panels out there during the day and get a little electricity. Now, it's not a lot of electricity, but the cool thing is that you put this on, you plug it into an outlet, and then when you plug in your phone or whatever you're using those electrons first. If you have just think about it like an accordion. You just open up a solar array that folds down like an accordion. It's like maybe 5, 4, 5, 6, 3, 5, 6 feet wide, and you suck it up. And it's not a lot, but hey, it's something. And if you lose power, you can still charge your phone. You can still do a little bit. It's probably not enough to run a refrigerator, but it's enough to run some of your other things, and it'll just nip off a little bit of your bill.
And is this basically authorizes that practice, right?
It does, yeah.
Previously, was that not authorized?
No, and the reason being is because the utilities, they get a little bit nervous when you start generating electricity on your own. And the reason they do, which is totally fair, is because unless you have a way of stopping it to going to the grid, let's say you plugged in a lot of solar, and then there was an energy disruption, a storm or something that brought down lines, the really big concern with the larger projects is you need to be able to disconnect that generation right at the house. Because if you have a line man or woman working 3 blocks away trying to get the lines back up, and there are allegedly no power coming from the utility generation side, so that lineman's up there just thinking there's no electricity whatsoever. But if you don't have a cutoff at your house and you're generating solar and it's going through that line, and then that lineman's up there trying to connect, you could electrocute somebody. You could kill somebody if the solar was large enough.
I just find that whole conversation fascinating. And it's one where unless you're like you and me and you're deep in this, I think the average person is not thinking about that. Moving on, though, so we just talked about all of these bills the past few years, and the General Assembly is taking this action. But I want to really talk about what influence does the General Assembly actually have. We can pass legislation, we can direct market actors, whether they're private or the ones that we control with regulation, to do certain things. But this is our last episode, so we've talked to the Energy Administration, the PJM, the PSC, we've talked to our friends from Virginia, and just in your view from a high level, the energy space is big and there's a lot of folks interacting. To level set expectations, how much authority does the General Assembly realistically have, or not even authority, tools to lower energy bills when there's all these other actors and all these other externalities?
The answer to that question is not as much as I think the public would think. Not nearly as much. I think that there are folks that thought that we were going to go in and half their electric bill. but that's just not possible. And the reason for that is because there are so many externalities. There are so many pieces of this. We've talked a little bit about it, but back in 24 and 25, there was a big 2024, 2025, there was a big fight with the PJMQ, which meant all these projects were going for big projects were going in for approval at the PJM. And they were just sitting there. In some cases, they were sitting there for 4 or 5 years. And then when they were finally approved, funding dried up, people moved on. You got solar panels that are more efficient now, but you budgeted for those solar panels, not these solar panels. Oh no, the tariffs, now we can't get those solar panels or whatever it may be. So that really hurt us a lot, but it showed us, how dependent we are. So then as all that was happening, then you have this big rise in data centers. So we can't control in Maryland, as a Maryland state, or we can't control what goes in other states. But because we're part of this regional transmission organization or this RTO, if a bunch of data centers go into Pennsylvania or go into other states, that's also on us. We have to distribute those costs. There's not a lot of control over that. And then from the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they push down a lot of policy that we try to fight, but it's federal policy, right? And then when you have the current administration coming in and turning everything 180 degrees, upside down, those market signals get really jammed up, and they just they just cause the rise of all the costs. So we can control what we can control from, requiring the utilities to join an RTO, which saves about $20 million estimated. It's hard to know exactly. The cap for the cap for their executives saves probably another 20 or 30 or $40 million. We don't know exactly because it's how you define them. So we can do what we can. I think, like you said, we threw everything that we could, the whole kitchen sink. I don't think there's much left we can do. So so much of this is out of our control. It's just going on throughout the entire country, the AI, the data centers. There's also phantom data center stuff. We can talk about that if you want. But
I'm not familiar with that term. What is phantom load, phantom data centers?
One of the things that we found that we created, I'll tell you what one of the problems is. So a lot of this is what's called the auction or the capacity markets auction. It's like futures. You're saying, okay, you're going out to all the generators and you're saying, okay, I need X amount of capacity on peak days 3 years from now. What's that going to cost? Well, those generators are looking at, and the PJM is looking at, and they're all looking at, okay, well, what is the energy future going to look like? How much electricity is going to be available? And so one of the things that they do is they look at projected load. And that projected load is how many data centers are said they're going to come into the PJM, and where in the PJM are they going to come? Where are these data centers going to be? So what a data center will do is they'll go, well, I really want to build a data center in Maryland, but Pennsylvania might be faster or might be easier, or maybe I'll just do it in another state and I'll do it in New Jersey or something like that.
Or West Virginia. I think that's the big fear right now. They're just going to open the doors and say, go nuts.
Yeah. So what happens is that you go, okay, well, I'll put in an application for one in Maryland, one in West Virginia, one in Pennsylvania, and one in Ohio. And then we'll just see which one comes first. Well, if you're good at doing that, putting those applications in, then the PJM, who's trying to plan for the future, for future energy need, because that's what they do. They plan for the current and future energy need. They go, oh my God, well, we have 4 data centers coming. Well, really, you only got 1 data center coming. But they think that there are 4 or 5 data centers coming. So they start preparing the load factor. Yeah. They start loading. Oh my God, so 3 years from now or 5 years from now, we're going to need, I don't know, 500 megawatts or whatever, or more, whatever it might be, when really you're only talking about 50.
That's insane.
So what ends up happening, this is the thrust, and this is probably we should have talked about earlier. This is the thrust of what a vast majority of these cost increases are, is then the generators go, okay, well, if you're going to need that much power 4 years from now, oh my God, how are we going to do that? Okay, well, we're just going to build, we're going to bid them out. And so they bid them out, and then it's an auction. And that auction just goes higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, to the point where the latest auctions from 8 months ago or so were, literally 6 or 7 times higher than they were, the previous couple of years.
It kind of sounds like a bubble.
So that's a whole other conversation, but I mean, there are those folks, and I'm not one of them or not one of them, but I think it's a very interesting conversation to have. And then is this whole data center thing a bubble? Because then what ends up happening is we build all this generation and they only build 1 data center. So the problem is that a bubble? Is it a bubble from they're not going to build as many data centers, or there are too many data centers, or what are we going to get for the electricity for these data centers? How are we going to power them? And then the other piece of it, I think, which is fascinating, which is I think the crux of a lot of these problems, is how many data centers are actually going to be built. Like,
Mhm.
what exactly is that going to be? So one of the parts of the bill that we did is a registration. So we're basically trying to get everybody in the PJM. I know Senator Hester, who's amazing on data centers. If you haven't talked to her about it, she
Oh,
knows.
she's awesome. Yeah,
She's
she's fabulous.
she is, and she's not only awesome just on data. She's just such a great senator. She works so hard for her people, right? For everybody, and she knows so much about data centers. And I had so many conversations when I would just call her up and say, "Katie, what are we going to do here? What do we do here?" And, I mean, a good part of the bill that came over from the Senate was the data center piece because she knew so much about it. The registration basically says if you're going to put it in, then so Senator Hester is working with the other states to do something similar so that we can, all the states in the PJM, and the PJM can be working from one worksheet, which is how many data centers is Dom really going to build? Is Dom really going to build one, or is he going to build five? And then we go back to Dom and we go, Dom, you really going to build five? He's like, oh, well, So then we can plan better for the future. But that's really where these costs spiral out of control because, we don't know what the good. So they're just buying futures, right? Think about it at the markets. They're just buying futures that are maybe way overpriced, or as you put it, it may be a bubble just waiting to burst. And we're buying electricity at god awful rates because the thought is 3, 4, 5 years from now, that there is going to be very, very, very little supply and an incredible amount of demand. And that may or may not be true.
This energy stuff, man, it's nuts. Like, this is a crazy, complicated policy area with like so many twists and turns. I want to transition for a minute. We're MACO, primarily a county organization. This is the Conduit Street podcast. I really want to drill down on what the lessons that county policymakers should take away from this. We just had a really big session. This is a family show, and I'm going to use a bad word, so I'm apologizing now if there's children. Preemption. There was a little bit of preemption in the bill that passed this year. I know it's over. I had to say it. Yeah, last year too.
Last year there was a lot of that. Sorry.
Yeah. It could have been worse. It could have been worse.
Right.
Fingers crossed for 2027. But the state is exercising its preemption authority over local jurisdictions. I think that's a big thing that county policymakers need to realize, that the General Assembly is being very direct. In terms of lessons that my folks should take away, what are the highlights? You're talking to county folks across the state. What do you, as the chair of the Environment Subcommittee, want them to walk away with?
You and I have kind of had this conversation probably a dozen times. And I think at the end of the day, what I would say is like this energy problem that we have is really significant. I mean, this is really hurting people. This is changing lives in the midst of a revolution in AI and all of that. But the energy piece specifically has gotten to the point where the state is feeling an enormous amount of pressure from our constituents to bring down these costs at just about, whatever cost. So what I would say is that just work with the General Assembly as much as you can, as quickly as you can, because these are coming very fast. So the idea of just saying no to things because one county wants to do one thing and the other county doesn't, like trying to find some compromise more quickly because it's moving fast. So compromise. You're not going to get everything you want. Try to limit things, but compromise and everything's fast. Like there's a couple pieces, like you and I worked on one specific bill that ended up getting folded in. And I want to thank you and give you a big shout out because that was a very complicated bill that was a leftover from 2 years ago. It kind of partially got passed, but didn't fully get passed. But similar thing about, like moving quickly on energy and solar deployment. But in the end, it ended up all working out. And that's in big part to you because you came back and said, okay, Delegate, these are the things that I can do with my counties, and I can get them to buy off on this, and I can't get them to buy off so much on that. But there was an incredible amount of compromise that I think I found this year that was nice. And I think that's just what I would say is that's what's going to happen in the future. And the compromise is not going to be, it's going to have to happen very, very quickly. And I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's hard and I know it's uncomfortable, but it's going to happen quickly because the pressures are just so great. The idea of delay is just not on the agenda anymore. And I think there's kind of this part where we're sorry, but we have to do this quickly. We can't wait any longer.
Well, one thing I will say, and I don't mean to blow smoke, but I have a huge admiration for how you conduct legislation and how you kind of operate, because there's some legislators where you can have an honest and frank conversation and you try to work that compromise. And then there's some folks where it's my way or the highway. And I find just your way of doing business is really conducive to good outcomes. So I just have to say, right back at you. I love working with you. So
It was hard, right, Dom? It was hard.
Oh yeah.
It was
Oh
really
yeah.
hard. It was in the 11th hour in some of the cases. We were talking late, but we got it done.
Yeah. And I think every time too, like that's how you get the really good compromises is,
Right.
you're working hard, you're probably cursing each other's name, but then you're going out to the bar later afterwards and like, listen, we worked it out and it's
Right.
done. As
Right.
as legislating should be.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right.
To close us out here, you sit in a very interesting spot in Annapolis, and you have a lot of pull and influence on the energy space specifically. From your perch, looking forward over the medium and long term, broadly, what does Maryland's energy future look like to you?
So to me personally, I would say distributed energy and storage. So one of the bills was the Drive Act, which allows for people to, bring their own generation in on their rooftop, store it in batteries, sell it back to the grid. Think about it like it's called a VPP or virtual power plant. And I think that more and more folks should consider doing that. And the reason I say that is because we have a lot vested in just really big utility scale generation, but those projects take a long time. They have to go through the CPCN process. Sometimes they have to go through the Public Service Commission or have to go through the PJ, and they can take years. But if you want to throw some solar and a couple batteries on your house, you can do that in 6 months. And then you can take those electrons at peak times, because all of this is about peak rates. All of this is about the peak, right? Our grid is built so that on the worst days when we're demanded the most amount of electricity, we can function. So we overbuild for those non-peak days. And we're trying to build over on the peak days so that we have, a little bit of headroom. So I would say, me personally, I think the more people distribute the storage, they can power their own home. In excess times, they can push them back on the grid and store their own electricity. I think that's easier, faster, better, and in many ways cheaper. So I think that's a big piece. And then what's going to come out of the Public Service Commission when it comes to net metering and how we incentivize net metering, that's going to be a big piece moving forward. Community solar versus rooftop solar versus commercial solar, like it's all a lot. But I would say, there's going to be more tweaks coming. Hopefully we won't look at a 126-page bill again or 125 bill anytime soon. But yeah, there's going to be more and more coming.
All right. Well, it looks like we're going to have to do a follow-up episode post 2027.
That sounds great. Yeah, it's a lot, right, Tom? It is a lot, but we have to figure out how to all work together to get more generation and more storage and use our brain, right? We got to use our brain. Those peak days, there's only like 44 of those peak days a year. Only 44 of those days, which get really dangerous from a power consumption perspective. And if everybody can just, I don't know, instead of running their air conditioner at 72 degrees or 69 degrees, in the middle of June, July, or August when it's 97 degrees outside, instead of running them all day, just, run it a little hard from about 12 o'clock to about 3 o'clock and then cut it back. Try not to use electricity on those peak days. If everybody does a little bit of that, that will go a long way to shave those peak issues.
I like that as a good place to end it. We're all in this together, and we're definitely doing a follow-up episode. So with that, Delegate David Fraser-Hidalgo, thank you for coming on.
Dom, it's been wonderful. Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing us to work together. It's been great.
Here's the 2027, my man.
Yeah,
so with that, let me read us out. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. The Conduit Streets Briefing Room will be out on Tuesdays with our normal show on Fridays. Register now for our annual Mako Summer Conference, August 12th through the 15th in Ocean City. And thank you to everyone for listening to The Briefing Room here on the Conduit Street Podcast.